Direct from the Six, world-renowned, Canada's largest city, with Canada's biggest thinkers, visionaries, and hustlers. This is Startup Talk, featuring the founders, funders, innovators, and community leaders who've led Canada's startup ecosystem right here in Toronto. You'll hear the challenges, the failures, the successes. Toronto's Startup Podcast gives you the full story direct from the entrepreneurs and influencers who've made a difference. Now, the host of Startup Talk, the founder of TorontoStarts, the Startup Coach.
What are the most important security regulations that Canadian startups should be aware of when raising capital?
Yeah, so regarding the securities regulatory environment, just as a quick definition for everybody, security means investment, essentially, very simply stated. And shares in your private company, ownership of your private company, and does qualify as an investment as a security. So if you're selling shares in your company, that's you selling those securities to people. Essentially, there's a number of different rules that private companies have to follow. So when you're raising capital, whether you're a private company or a public company, you do have to follow Canadian securities law. So the regulations apply to everybody, even if you're a private company. You're not exempt from regulations. The easy thing to keep in mind, a good sort of rule of thumb, is if you're raising money from immediate friends and family, or if you're raising money from accredited investors, so-called angel investors, those two types of individuals can invest into your company without having to do any sort of big paperwork or filings with the regulators. So going out, pitching angel groups, all that sort of stuff that you've been doing, going to pitch competitions, that's all totally fine. And, there's a reason why that's what the industry does. That's all totally acceptable. The only time you'll need to start thinking about, a greater regulatory burden is when you start having more than 50 shareholders. Now, one misconception is having more than 50 shareholders makes you a public company, or what some people call a reporting issuer. That is not correct. So it's not, now that I have 50 shareholders, I'm suddenly a public company. I have to do audited financial statements and all this stuff. That is not the case. Without getting too in the weeds, essentially, every time a company raises money that's a private company, it uses a legal doorway, which is called a prospectus exemption. And there's a full list of prospectus exemptions on the Equivesto website in the Learning Center if you really want to, fall asleep while reading something. But essentially, a prospectus exemption is a legal doorway that allows you to raise money. The doorway that lets you raise from friends and family and accredited investors without doing any reporting is called the private issuer exemption. And you can use that as long as you have less than 50 shareholders. If you have more than 50 shareholders, that doesn't make you a public company. It just means you can't use the private issuer exemption anymore. There is still a standalone friends and family exemption. You can keep using that. And there's a standalone accredited investor exemption. You can keep using that. There's a new exemption called equity crowdfunding. You can use that. There's a bunch of other doorways that exist that allow you to raise capital without going public or being a public company or requiring audited financial statements. It just means the one set of rules that lets you raise money without having to tell the government or do any filings, called the private issuer exemption, you can no longer use after you have more than 50 shareholders. I think that's the main misconception for capital raising in the Canadian space. People think, I have 51, I'm a public company now, which is not true.
So I want to say thank you, Alex, for taking the time. You want to tell us again what you and Equivesto do and what are all the resources over there that Equivesto people should go check out?
Yeah, absolutely. So Equivesto is an exempt market dealer and an online investment portal for Canadian small businesses, startups, private funds looking to raise capital from Canadian resident investors. So if you are looking to do an angel round and you want a place where somebody's done a bit of due diligence into you already, they've helped you structure your whole round, plan out the valuation, got all the right legal documents, and they provide a digital location for you to actually go ahead and transact, certainly come check out what we're doing at equivesto.com. We also have a really robust learning center. So a ton of what we talk about here already is in our learning center. We also have a bunch of courses for free in our learning center on investor readiness. What are investors looking for from you? All this sort of information is there. It's totally free. A lot of it is webinars that we created with Craig. So feel free to go and consume some of that information. We want to try to help make capital raising easier and more rewarding for all Canadian companies.
This has been Startup Talk, Toronto's startup podcast. For more exclusive content, the episode vault, and to be part of TorontoStarts community, visit TorontoStarts.com. Get your name on the newsletter mailing list and check out our upcoming events. For more episodes, subscribe now. And please recognize the time and work behind the scenes put into connecting you with the biggest visionaries, entrepreneurs, and innovators in Toronto by leaving a 5-star review. Join us for more next episode from Toronto's most active entrepreneur and startup community on Startup Talk.